that in a little bit. But rock is very strong, and rock can also be very brittle or just not a great place gear. So throughout the course of this, when I'm teaching you how to place gear and when you're doing it, we're just going to need to make sure that we're paying attention to everything and putting good placements in. But the best part about it is that to learn how to place good placements, you're going to have to place bad placements. So there's going to be a lot of critiques into it, but we're going to start with kind of the first rudimentary thing right here. And these are called stoppers or nuts right here. They're small pieces of aluminum, generally attached with a wire that then would be clipped to a carabiner. These were developed in the UK, and they were actually what they their name inferred. They were nuts, like nuts and bolts, machined nuts that they then put cord through and place into rock. Because before these were developed, what do you think they used to go into rock?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing.
No, they used something.
They died like real men.
No, they weren't bolting anything.
Hooks.
Pitons. So they're hammering pitons into the wall. So if they're taking a piece of iron, they're hammering into a crack, what's that doing to the wall?
Deteriorating it.
Yeah, it's damaging it. The piton is changing the shape of the rock. And most of the time they would just leave the piton behind. So then there's a piton in the rock. There's many that are strewn about these cliffs as well. But after kind of those big wall ascents in Yosemite, like El Cap and Half Dome, they were still using pitons. But one of the big proponents of clean climbing, his name is Royal Robbins. He also created a clothing company, so if that name sounds familiar, there's a clothing company named after him. But he went to the UK, saw that they developed this style of climbing where you would place gear into a crack and then be able to take it out. So you're not losing your gear and you're not damaging the rock. Thought it was really cool, so he brought it back to Yosemite and he did a climb called the Nutcracker. It's 500 feet tall, and he did it only using passive protection. So from the ground up, he didn't hammer a piton, didn't do anything. So as him and his partner climbed through the route and finished it, it looked like nothing ever had happened. And that was where the clean climbing boom happened. So then these became more pronounced. People started to make them more. Black Diamond started to make them. A bunch of other companies started to make them. But passive type of equipment is very straightforward. Generally, it's an anodized aluminum, very lightweight. They generally core out the middle to make it lighter weight too. But this piece of protection allows you to find a constriction in the rock and place it. Now, like I said, rock's pretty tough, right? So if you were to take one of these pieces of protection, find a constriction in the rock, and see, generally I have a better one here, but would that necessarily pull up now? So I found a constriction, place that piece of gear. It needs to come in a kind of a downward force because that's where the force is going. But all you need to do then is simply pop it out. The rock hasn't changed. You have your piece of gear and you're good to go. What we're going to do is actually kind of slightly better vertical crack because I'm always over there. But they're just unpanicky. They can actually be placed in pretty much three ways. One, like this. You can also flip it the other way. and you can also place it like widthwise as well to get the constriction. So it serves a variety of sizes with one piece. Now, if I was to look at this, I can kind of size it up. Now, when you guys are starting to place gear, you're going to look at it and not really know. Big thing is you don't want to fit something too big into it to force it in, because if it's not going to go in, it's not going to go in. And if you get it in there somehow, it's going to get stuck. But I can take this piece, see that there's a wider opening here, and then it comes down to a constriction at the base of the rock. And then what I'm looking for is to have good surface coverage on the piece. And what that means is that, let me just wiggle this guy out. See, there we go. Is that you need to have a lot of contact with both sides of the piece. You don't want to just rely on one side. You want to try to get as much as possible. So in this case, I'm going to take this piece all the way down to where I think it's going to stick, but even then, you can see it gets close to the edge of that crack, correct? Mm-hmm. So I'd probably want to do something just slightly larger. So, when I look at this, that's smaller. Get that in there, and now it sits further back, and there's more contact. Now when you're looking for that, you want to make sure that both sides of the rock have connection to the piece, and you also want to make sure that it's not going to slip and fall all the way down.
So like a rule of thumb for like how deep in it should be?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And if I can actually, pop this guy out. Come on. Go, go, go. And you'll see that. That the Devil's Lake, the rock's very hard. But you generally want to be about 2 to 3 inches deep. You don't want to set right at the edge like this. Because if anything was to shift or the anchor was to shift, it could pop out. So you want to set it a little further back. But the big thing with passive gear is that it's fairly easy to place. It's a solid piece of metal, and you're going into a piece of rock. Now, when you're looking at something like a horizontal constriction, you can also place passive gear. So if I was to look at this slot right here, I could actually place a piece of gear there, and I can set it in this direction here. It's not going to go through that constriction, so you can still set on a horizontal. But this is still fairly close. But for Devil's Lake, it's okay. When you get to different types of sandstone, rock that's a little bit more brittle, that's why you want to get in the habit of placing further back, because if you are right at the edge, when the forces are applied, it could chip that off if you were to fall onto it.
So kind of a test, like get a couple good yanks.
A couple of quick yanks like this, you can see it's solid, but a body fall would obviously be more force than this. But that's kind of more in a lead climbing scenario. Whereas when we're doing top roping and when we get into the anchoring systems, you'll understand how much force is actually going into each piece, which is a lot smaller than you would think. But here's the fun part now. We've got a bunch of different nut sets here. I'll actually place them. Right here. And you can take one and just look for cracks.